Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our special edition NATS chat. We are here to talk about mental health for our NATS members and voice teachers across the world as we all face the COVID-19. And I will introduce my panelists momentarily, but for a moment, I'd like to introduce Karen Brunson, our president. Karen, did you want to say a few words?
Yeah, just a few words. First of all, I want to thank Kari Reagan and Alan Henderson for putting together all of these NATS chats. This is the fourth one. They are receiving such aplomb from everybody. It's just fantastic that we can connect this way and be helpful this way with our organization NATS. And so we're looking forward to doing more of them too. There are more ideas that are going to be coming forward. And I just am so impressed with the outpouring of posts and people who miss singing, people whose voices are not in shape like they used to be, how much we depend on other people in our vibrant musical worlds. And we need the reminders to practice and to learn. And we miss that ever-present precedence that's set by the colleagues and our students that we work with. And I think some of that will be discussed today as we talk about keeping our mental health good in this whole genre of what we're about to do with being connected online more so than before. I'd like to remind you to reach out to Emeritus members also, and to think of those students that are going to be graduating this year, for instance, and that they don't have the same community that they would have had the coronavirus not happened. So I invite you to enjoy this and refer to it and get the word out to people. And let's continue to keep lifting each other up through NATS and our profession of singing. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Karen. Well, Alan and I are so pleased to have our panelists here, Susan Tesch, Dr. Duke Miles, Dr. Anne-Marie Roepke. And full disclosure, both Susan and Anne-Marie are in my private studio. They sing, they have beautiful voices. And so I was so thrilled to draw on their expertise for this chat today. And why don't we just each take a moment to introduce yourselves with your practice, with regards to practice. Susan, do you want to start?
Sure. So I've been in private practice for about over 30 years. The last 20-something have been in Edmonds, Washington. I got my bachelor's degree from UCLA in 1987, and then I got my master's degree from Cal State Northridge in 91. Became licensed in California in 93 and licensed in Washington in 96. And I have a psychoanalytic background, so I'm especially interested in the ways in which our unconscious minds and our emotional system and our limbic system is processing COVID.
And Susan has I hope this is okay to say, but has her husband is in the medical field. He is a general practitioner. So she also
family practitioner. That's
family practitioner. Yes, and so has a special understanding from that, him coming home every night as well. Duke, would you like to share just a bit about?
Absolutely. I really appreciate being here. I'm not a singer, but I am a therapist, and my background is that I graduated from Georgia Southern University here where I live now in Statesboro, Georgia. Many years ago. Then I did a master's in music at Southern Methodist University, and then got my DMA at Peabody Conservatory. Taught at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill for 17 years. And for all sorts of different reasons, decided that I wanted to do something different, and was able to do a master's in social work while I was still teaching at UNC. Took a year sabbatical and decided I would move back to the area I live in now and work for a year and see what it felt like. And I've never regretted it. So I've been practicing for probably some 26 years as a therapist. I see individuals, and I'm a licensed imago therapist. And so I see a lot of couples using that model. And I continue to play piano some. Enjoy working as a church organist with Alan Henderson at a church here in Statesboro. As a matter of fact, we did a service today, and so it's very interesting for me to be here and to draw on both my memories of being a piano teacher and a pianist, and also my life as a therapist.
Thank you, Duke. And Anne-Marie.
Hey folks, my name is Anne-Marie Roepke, and I'm very pleased to join the conversation. So I'm a clinical psychologist, and I have two hats. The first is that I'm a therapist in private practice, and there I work mostly with adults who are experiencing anxiety, as well as some of the challenges that often come along with anxiety, like depression or trouble with sleep, or maybe wanting to make changes in how you're using alcohol or substances. And my orientation is cognitive behavioral, which is a pretty practical, skills-focused style of therapy for the most part. And it's based on the idea that the way that we feel, the way that we think, and the way that we act are all connected. And so if we make changes in one, it'll often affect the others. My other hat is as a trainer and consultant. So I work with organizations, especially the helping professions, and I help them with a couple things. One is changing their skills, their practices, their communication and culture. And then the other is implementing new things in their organization, all while trying to attend to their own well-being and their own resilience as they go through these changes. Yeah, so that's a bit about me. I'm looking forward to contributing.
Thank you. So as we get started, I want to assure all the attendees that nobody sees names of who's joined us today, and nobody will see the questions that you might ask except Alan and I. And although I usually say the person's name to attribute the question to our attendee, I will not be doing so today. So this will be very private, and feel free to ask questions as we get started. We have specific topics will guide us through. And so, and also we want to put up a disclaimer that just says that, you know, this is not medical advice. We'll just leave that up for a minute or so, and just encouraging you to seek the medical advice of your own professional. And that, yes, so we'll leave that there and let you read that. So let's jump in and see what comes of our conversation today. I want to start just with the big picture. We are in unprecedented times for our generation, certainly, with this COVID-19, and it really is a global crisis. And Susan, you have some wonderful big picture thoughts about this. Would you like to lead off?
Yeah, it is unprecedented, and I don't think the world's going to be the same. We aren't going to go back to what we had, and none of us knows what the future looks like. None of us can imagine the path forward. So I absolutely want to take a moment to thank you, Kari, for trying to give some shape to the future, which is what this talk is about. We're all in greater or lesser degrees of survival mode right now. My God, where am I going to get my money? My God, what's going to happen to my health? My God, what's going to happen to my loved ones? It feels really chaotic. So what I think is really important to keep in mind at this time is that those survival instincts they're animal, we are animals, and they can create kind of a neurological feedback loop where, because your shoulders are up to your ears and you're breathing in a shallow way, you're telling your central nervous system, this is a disaster. And so what I think really helps is to remind yourself to put your shoulders down, take nice even breaths, and do your best to come out of that survival mode. And I think art is a great way to do that. It sends a different message to your central nervous system that says, oh, we're okay. Oh, look, I'm smiling at Kari over there, and she's smiling back. We're okay. So if I greet a face that looks like this, then I'm going to get like this. So I think there's a lot of value in all of us doing our best to transmit friendliness, humor, love, joy, connection.
Well, and I noticed this week the students that did the online lessons, and I get the difference in their face at the beginning and the end of the lesson, and every one of them said, I just wasn't sure. I didn't want to cancel, but I wasn't sure why. because a lot of their contracts have ended, or, you know, performances. And every single one of them at the end of the session said, oh, I'm so glad I just feel so normal. You know, and so again, that the ripple effect of every one of us, our energy to the next person, what you've just spoken about is important, I think, Susan. Duke and Anne-Marie.
I have been amazed watching the people in Italy on balconies singing. And that says to me that we all know that there is something so incredibly valuable. And, you know, we can talk about what's happening in the brain and probably dopamine getting released. But, you know, there is something about the power that music has, which gets us out of that old brain sort of response, that flight or fight. And slows everything down a little bit. And it's just been fascinating to watch. I saw something and just glimpsed an entire choir somehow doing synchronized singing this morning on a CNN production. And I was getting ready to leave, so I didn't get to watch very much of it, but they all had on headsets. And they were managing to coordinate it. And I don't know quite how they did that, but they were all, it was a high school choir, and they were all on the screen. And it just speaks to how incredibly important arts are for all of us right now.
Mm-hmm. Anne-Marie, did you any?
Yeah, echoing Duke, it really does strike me that this particular audience has such an asset at this time, because you all already work with this expressive, creative medium that you probably can often use to channel emotions, to express emotions, to work through emotions. I was also struck by what Susan said about the way that we signal to each other how calm or how anxious we are. And it reminds me of, you know, being on a flight where maybe there's some turbulence and we're not sure how scared to be, so we look around us. And if we look to the flight attendant and they're saying, coffee, tea, soda, we now have lime seltzer water, it means to us that we're going to be safe. And so I think that people on this call who are teachers have such an opportunity to have that kind of grounding presence for students. So I'm really happy to be here in any support of that role that you all have.
But music, there's evidence to show that music can help deactivate that stress, correct?
Absolutely. Anybody want to speak to that?
Go yeah, go ahead if you have some.
No, I mean, it absolutely. First of all, it's a connective medium. Where song is all about transmitting connection to other people, and anytime that we engage in that, you know, we're sending a signal to the people around us that we have something to share. And connection, particularly, I think, is going to be the saving grace. The fact that we're all here doing this, for example, because we all care about music, is going to be the thing that gets us through this. There's no question that music, you know, the whole system responds to music.
Mm-hmm. Well, and providing normalcy too, you know, something that's like, oh, this is what my life used to be. I went to my music lessons every week. So now, even though the medium perhaps has changed, that there's, I think, isn't that normalcy is really important to all of our lives in a time that is so abnormal.
Yeah, I'm also reflecting about the connections between music, well-being, and mental health. And it puts me in mind of some of the research in positive psychology, which is about the science of understanding human flourishing, human happiness. And one of the models that I really like is by Martin Seligman, who proposes that there's 5 main parts to our well-being. And they're represented by this acronym PERMA, where P is positive emotions, feeling happiness or joy or contentment or love. E is engagement, really being in the flow, in the zone, really engaged in what we're doing and using our strengths. The R is relationships, this connection with other people. The M is a sense of meaning in what we do, and the A is accomplishment. And when I think about our involvement with music, I think a lot of times it can hit several or maybe even all of those things. And so I think sometimes when we're in times where one part of our well-being is really taking a hit, you know, maybe we're experiencing a lot of really frightening emotions, can we turn to some of those other parts of well-being and find things that we feel deeply engaged in, where we can have a sense of flow, a sense of using our strengths, accomplishment from improving our skills, connection with others. Anything so much of that is served by music.
Oh, I love that. Anne-Marie, will you tell me, so I can type it into the chat. Attendees, there's both a chat box that you have access to and then the question box. What was the name again?
Yeah, so the scientist is Martin Seligman, Seligman, and the theory is PERMA theory, PERMA. And I'm happy to also send any resources after the chat if it's helpful and people are interested in learning more about anything.
Great, okay. And I've just put that in the chat box for everyone to see. Somebody has typed, I think this is a great place for this comment question. This person says, I'm trying to be so positive and affirming for my students, but I'm struggling to find the time and space to be real with myself and acknowledge the loss I feel. Students' recitals, opera, choral performances at school, loss of performances for this person. It seems the feelings of anger only add to the darkness we all feel, but I do have those feelings. Where do I put that? So let's talk about some of the anger aspect of this.
I think it's really significant that that this person is acknowledging this, because I think that anger is likely to be the least talked about emotion in relation to what we're all going through. And of course we're angry, and we're angry on so many different levels. And certainly when one's work as one knows it has changed, there's going to be a whole lot of resentment. And what are we supposed to be angry at? I mean, you know, we can find various things to point to that from time to time, but this is something that's happened that we have no control over, which only enhances that emotion. And I think one of the things we're going to need to talk a good bit about today is, what do we do with these emotional responses, starting with acknowledge them, observe them, notice them, if we can, write about them. You know, there's nothing wrong with going outside and yelling and screaming a little bit as well, because I think expressing the emotion is going to be very important. Interestingly, Anne-Marie, I was thinking when you were talking about music and the infinite opportunity to express what we're feeling musically. And I think that that is such an important part of the work that we're doing, and that we're going to be doing as musicians, and at you guys who are working with students, because there is some place to express almost any type of sadness musically, and I think that that's a very important thing. I really think I particularly am a fan of writing, and I think, to be specific about the person's question, it's going to take different forms at different times, and sometimes, of course, distraction is going to be the thing that we need to do. And there are all kinds of tricks for distraction as well. Listening to music, only one, and choosing the sort of music that you think can really distract whatever the feeling is. But also getting the journal out and just trying to get it from the inside onto paper.
I thought as well that part of what this person might be experiencing is a little bit of the fight part of fight or flight. So there's that I think we're just more readily, you know, kind of snappy and angry. We're agitated because we're frightened, and so fight or flight is kicked in. And along with that, I would say to this person, because as a therapist, we have to do this. We have to show up week after week, day after day. I don't cancel regardless of what's going on in my life. And sometimes I'm thinking, how am I going to do this? And the answer is, as best you can.
I love that.
It's a time to be a lot gentler with yourself. And so I don't think you need to kind of plaster on the happy face. And I think you can be real with your students. This is hard on all of us, and supportive. You know, you don't need to kind of convince them, because no one's going to be convinced anyway. This is really upsetting. It's chaos. And so what we're trying to do is keep giving shape to the chaos, keep giving shape to the chaos so that it doesn't amplify. And I think as best we can is a good standard for right now.
When we voice teachers, I think, are used to holding a lot of balls in the air and juggling. And so, you know, this person is talking about all these performances and recitals, both for, you know, there's more than just one student, right? Many students. I think what's disorienting is we can't strategize our way out of this problem the way we might be able to. We have to just sit with it. I'm finding I'm a problem solver. Let's work around this. You know, Susan's known me for a while now, so she knows that about me. And yes, I still have to do that in this context, but not in the way that I might normally do, because I have limitations. And I think that goes back to what Duke was talking about, is the feeling aspect of all of this, and that we have to just allow those feelings and acknowledge them. And yeah,
and it may be part of, it may be part of grieving too. I wanted to say denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. The anger part is just a way of saying, I don't want this, fix this, somebody. It's human, and we do need to be able to mourn. We are all mourning in as best we can, which is a messy process.
Yeah, I loved what Susan and Duke were saying about doing our best to allow or accept or make space for some of these emotions. I think that for most of us, when we experience these sort of difficult or unpleasant emotions, whether it's fear, anger, sadness, or whatever, our desire is to push it away. And very understandably, right? I have that desire too. And I think what we tend to find is that it's almost like trying to have a beach ball that we're shoving under the surface of the water, or maybe we can do that for a little while, but the longer we hold it down, the more tired we get from that. And there's still that force of the emotion wanting to sort of pop back up. And so I think there's a lot of work that goes on in therapy to make space for those difficult emotions and find other tools to use to deal with them. And like Duke is saying, we need all sorts of different tools at all sorts of different moments. Sometimes it's distraction, sometimes it's sitting with the emotion. And another tool that I really like and might be helpful for some teachers, like the one who wrote this in, is just a trick called worry scheduling that is sort of about harnessing the power of procrastination in a way. The idea is that if I have to go and teach 5 lessons or do 5 therapy sessions, and if I'm not in a really great place because I'm having my own sadness, fear, anger, etc., it's not about saying I can't feel those things because I have to be a teacher or I have to be a therapist. It's saying those are okay feelings to have. This is a hard time. This is an inconvenient time to be really sitting in those. So can I literally just make a date with myself that at 6 p.m. today, when I'm done with these, I get 20 minutes to worry all I want, feel as pissed off as I want, etc. And then, of course, the trick is we have to keep that appointment with ourselves, because otherwise we learn that we're not reliable and it doesn't work in the future. I think worry scheduling can be a nice practical way to give ourselves an opportunity to experience those feelings when we can do it and when it won't interfere with other goals we really care about.
And I've always learned across, 1 or 2 therapy sessions myself, that you have to let the feelings move through us. The best way through them is to feel them and move through them, rather than like you. I love that analogy of the ball. Yeah. One of my students texted me last night and said, I'm just so angry right now. Found out another contract was canceled, and I said, I affirmed, I'm sorry. I understand that. Take a tennis racket to a pillow and have at it, move through that anger if that's what would help you to do so. Anyway, we are definitely on the front lines of not only our own mental health, but the students in our care as teachers. So, and I wanted to say, Duke, you reminded me of something I read when you were talking about writing. I happened to see something where they're asking people to document their experience. And so much is coming out right now about the 1918 virus. Was it the Spanish
flu? Spanish flu.
Yeah, and I thought, wow, what a wonderful idea for somebody that's where they want to channel. There are literally within, I think, communities, people are setting up these sites where you can document or you can just document it on your own. So there may be opportunity for people to contribute in that way that might feel good in documenting this experience on an individual basis. Have you all seen that in your area by chance?
No, I haven't. I didn't know that existed.
Yeah, it was a call from, I'll find it and share it somewhere.
What I did read something about was an observation that apparently after the 1918 flu, there was a desire to pretend it didn't happen. People were not talking about it. And so that, of course, puts us into that realm of what you're talking about, Anne-Marie, suppressing emotions rather than noticing them. And we can't just push them away, you know, as we try and continue to live our lives. And apparently they did that after the 1918 flu and some political implications as well. And that's part of our human desire to get up and keep going, which is a positive thing, I think, in part. And yet, if you think about what those people must have held inside with no outlet, because people didn't talk about things in 1918 nearly as much as we do today.
Yeah, and that brings me to something I really appreciated about what you just said, Dr. Reagan, about communicating with your students about their frustration, their anger. I think it's so important that not only do we allow ourselves space for our difficult emotions, but that we allow that space for our students. And I loved your validating statement of like, yeah, this is really frustrating. Absolutely. Instead of trying to silver line it for them and say, well, like, don't worry, you know, it'll get rescheduled soon or something like that.
Mm-hmm. I think so much is just continuing to show up for people is phenomenal. If you can just do that, that's phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a time when we need to be really understanding with ourselves, because this is so strange and unusual. I have another point, but you were about to say something, Kari.
Oh no, when you think of it, jump in. Somebody has typed in that we have so many more resources today than in the 1819 flu. And I know one day this week I got up and I just, you know, before I started my teaching day, I just had a moment where you wake your little eyes up and you think, oh, this is really I have to face today and I don't know when it's going to end. And I had just a little moment of self-pity and, you know, yada, yada. And then I thought, get over yourself, Kari. Your ancestors lived through World War II, World War I, other things. They didn't have the internet, the comforts of their home, driving down to get your groceries at the grocery store, right? And it doesn't mean we don't get to have our feelings, right? I think we have to have our valid feelings, but at the same point, we have so many more comforts to get us through this and an ability to stay connected. So as a therapist, how do you work on that continuum?
Well, I think that's a really good point. I do think there's perspective that's needed because we can all fall into our little narcissistic, you know, my life is ruined, but actually everybody is in a state of, you know, fright and so on. Well, I think connection is everything. And I thought of one more point about singing particularly. There's something, it's an attachment thing between mother and baby. There's something called motherese, which some of you have probably heard about. It's the way that mothers talk to babies. They, hello, look at you. Are you tired today? Oh my goodness. There's a lot of music in that. And that creates a connection between the mother and infant. There are some mothers that actually cannot speak motherese, and it's disruptive to the bond that's created there. I think more than ever, it's going to be all about connection, whether you're a therapist or a music teacher, but particularly music does have that connecting, it's a connecting medium. It puts you in a great place to be helpful to people.
I love that. Somebody asked about blurring boundaries, right? Right now we're in a time of blurring boundaries, and they would like ideas how to best serve their students without blurring appropriate boundaries during this unprecedented time. Does that, I bet you, are you finding that as well in your practice? Because there's some similarities between what we all do.
Yeah, because they want to know the story. My clients want to know about my husband because they know he's a doctor. They're texting me, how can they pay me now? And I think if I'm too stiff, you know, and not conveying my humanity, then it's going to feel off-putting. That this is bigger than profession. So the usual boundaries can and should be a little bit different. But also, I don't want to step so far out of my role that becomes kind of frightening and overwhelming. So I think it's important to keep maintaining some boundaries, but also like relax them in certain ways. And again, keep being forgiving of yourself and understanding of yourself. These are hard times.
I love that. Duke or Anne-Marie, do you guys have any thoughts about the blurring boundaries?
Yes. I think it's a difficult subject for therapists because we spend a tremendous amount of our lives thinking about it and arguing about it and on and on and on. One thing I was thinking about when I was asked to do this is that when I was teaching piano, I had one type of relationship with my students. But people would ask me, family members and friends, I can't believe you're doing this. You were a piano teacher and now you're a therapist. And I would look at them and I would say, you can't imagine how similar certain things are. And by that, I meant the studio or the office is a container. And I think that what happens in it is something that is rather magical, if you allow me that, and I think most of us have felt it. It's magical and it's bigger than the people in that container. And I agree completely with you, Susan, that if ever this is a time when, as teachers, I think it's going to be necessary to each person's comfort level, and that's very important, that you have to decide as a teacher how far you can go and when you say, now I need to hear you sing, but certainly to lower those boundaries a bit and let people just talk about what their experience is, I think is going to be so important in that container, because they're coming to it because there's safety in it, and there's safety in the relationship that has been formed over time with their teachers.
Anne-Marie, any thoughts from you on boundaries?
Well, so it's interesting because when I initially heard you read the question, my mind went to the boundary between being a music teacher and being more of a therapist. And I don't know which boundaries exactly this person had in mind, but I do think that sometimes we can have the concern or the fear that if I ask people, how are you doing with all of this? Or if I make that validating statement, like, yeah, that's a really valid reason to be angry, that somehow it will open the floodgates and then we'll, get too deep. And I think that that's often not the case. And just giving a little moment to acknowledge and name what's going on and say that it's valid and it's okay and it's welcome here can be really powerful for helping us to sort of move through it. I also think that if students are struggling and the teacher does want to have a conversation, there's a real difference between saying, tell me more about all the things you're afraid of, and saying, tell me what really helps you to get through fear and anxiety. Like, what have you leaned on in the past to get through hard times? And I think that those take the conversation in very different directions that might feel different for people who have questions about boundaries and where they're willing to go or not go. So I think that there's room to attend to and name what's going on in the studio without necessarily making it really deep and about people's most painful emotions. I also imagine there are some students who would really love for there to be very firm boundaries, and it would give them a sense of safety and normalcy to be able to just come into the studio, do a lesson, and have 60 minutes where they don't have to talk about this or they don't have to think about it. So I'm a big fan of always just asking permission too, like, hey, would it be okay if I ask you about fill in the blank, how you're coping with all this?
Mm-hmm. I love that. And we went down that path of voice teacher as therapist, that would be a whole can of worms that today is not for. But that is a really important topic in our field, Anne-Marie, that we discuss peripheral, and we need to explore that at some point further. So we may have you back to discuss that because there's this very interesting relationship we have with our students where we are often the older wiser or same age wiser or in that context, you know. And we have to be very careful. We are not licensed therapists, the majority of us. And yet we may be the person that singer comes to for guidance and advice and emotional support. And it's a tricky thing to navigate, but I think we won't go down that rabbit hole today, but that's an important conversation for sure. Well, let's, let me just see if this question, someone writes in, it feels similar to going back to my first days of teaching where I learned little by little, student by student, lesson by lesson, what felt right and what didn't regarding appropriate boundaries. That's it. So this person, it sounds like, is feeling like we're kind of starting over with a baseline of appropriate boundaries in some ways right now in this unprecedented time. That's an interesting thought to me.
That's really interesting. Interestingly as well, HIPAA, which is the Health Information Privacy and Portability Act, which you always have to sign when you go to a medical professional of any sort, has been relaxed. They have sent out word that we don't have to be quite so stringent with all that. So that's a huge boundary right there, which I think just is part of this reality that boundaries have changed. I hadn't thought of that. I thought that was a great question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a great question. Another person writes in, I have found my students who have anxiety and depression seem to be more symptomatic right now, with more hopelessness attitude, especially with those who have classes that aren't meeting. And I have to say in my studio as well, lots of students in that 20-something age range that deal with anxiety on a daily basis, and it has escalated. And any thoughts for you besides what we've already discussed? Just any around specific anxiety? Anne-Marie, I know that's one of your areas of specialty. Any thoughts for us about how to navigate that?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about it as a therapist. Apropos of what you were just saying, I'm trying to sort through which of those would apply, in the music studio setting. Absolutely, if we have background challenges with anxiety and depression, a lot of times these events can increase those. I would say there's maybe two tools that I lean on as a therapist in times like this. Again, I'm coming from a cognitive behavioral perspective. So one skill is something called cognitive restructuring, where we really try to identify our thoughts and then hold them at arm's length and examine them. Really asking ourselves two questions. One is this thing 100% true? And two, is this thought useful to me? Is it serving me? And what's interesting is that I think a lot of times with our day-to-day anxieties, if we really question and say, is this 100% true? We can find that, no, it's not. We're maybe seeing things in really black or white terms or jumping to the worst possible conclusions. I think something that's interesting in this time is that sometimes these really upsetting and nerve-wracking thoughts we have might be true, or we might just have no way to know if they're true or not. If I worry, I don't know if I'll see my mother alive again. That's a valid fear for someone to have at this time, especially if they have a parent who has, compromising medical issues. And so then I think the question is not so much, is this thought true, but we go to, is it serving me? Is it useful? And are there things that I can do to improve the situation? Are there things that I can do, for example, for this parent, etc. The other tool is something called behavioral activation, and that speaks more to depression, right? And exactly as you're saying, if people normally have things they lean on for their well-being, and those things are canceled, it's really hard. So something that I invite people to do is to write a list, or even better yet, just sort of a loose mind map. It doesn't have to be linear and analytic, but to write that list of activities that normally sustain them and boost their mood, and then try to identify what is really the core ingredient of that. So it might not be being at music class in that room is the core ingredient, but it is that opportunity to work on something that's engaging, to work on accomplishment, to be connected with other people. So for each of the activities that makes it on that map, how can we identify a substitute that has that same active ingredient?
Mm-hmm. Oh, somebody makes this point that I want to run across you guys. So the point about teacher and therapist and the lines, that we certainly should not be building a false dependency as voice teachers, again, because we are not therapists. And so it's an interesting challenge for we voice teachers. Do you have any thoughts specifically about this, not creating false dependency? Again, speaking, if you can educate those of us who are voice teachers from your perspective as therapists and helping us to create boundaries.
That is a really important thing that you do, and that's different from therapists who are encouraging dependency. Lean on me, I'll be here for you. Bring your stuff, cry, tell me the whole story. But no, that's really important. I would say that it's a really good time to just gently, I would say, steer people back towards the music. And I think with positive, not you better stop that, that's out of control, but more, just, wow, that's really rough. Let's bring it into song, kind of gentle. Let's see what happens with your scales. Just kind of keep gently steering them back to the music so that you don't end up getting into a situation which is uncomfortable for you.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like early on in this crisis, and I'm in Seattle, as is our Susan and Marie, so we're a couple weeks ahead of everyone. It would have been odd not to have taken a few minutes of the lesson to just, how are you doing, and to check in. But this is our new normal. And I know recently I had a very young student, far too young to be dealing with cancer. And for me, the lesson was about, she was seeing doctors and talking about the cancer the rest of the time. When she walked in my door, I wanted it to be about music and singing and use that time to focus. And of course, I wanted to provide her support, but I'm not her therapist, I'm her music teacher. So I think maybe now is the time for us to really focus on that. When they walk in the door, let it be a place of music and healing and that kind of a focus.
What's analogous, I was just thinking of, is I think because I have a face that says I listen well or something, I get people just, you name it, the clerk at Macy's, I'm just doing a transaction, suddenly I'm hearing the story of her life. And I think, the important thing to take note of is when you feel a little bit burdened or uncomfortable. That's healthy. That's a good signal that you can use. I'm having that kind of uncomfortable feeling. This isn't good. Let me steer it back towards what's appropriate. And so what I might do with the Macy's clerk is I might just say something like, wow, that's tough. Gosh, well, thank you so much. Because you want to give warmth. You don't want people to feel rejected, but you definitely do have to keep good boundaries. They're best for everybody. We can't save the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, and a couple of our attendees several people are saying, to make a statement of, I'm not a therapist, but in my experience, or, simply redirecting them. It can help to redirect them and to relax them.
And I like that idea because I like the idea of acknowledging that no matter how quickly you get through the check-in, because there's almost always check-in in the best of times. No matter how quickly you do that, I think if the student is needing to express something, you acknowledge it. And I think everyone has to do it differently, but the excitement of the students knowing that the teacher wants to get to the music could be very healing, I think. A statement about, I've been thinking about, forgive me, I only think of the piano. I've been thinking about the way you sang this last week. And, what occurs to me is that you're doing this so well, and I can't wait for us to do it again today, because I had this thought about it. So that you have purpose for redirecting. I think the worst thing is to feel redirected in a way that that doesn't seem to have purpose.
So that they feel discounted in that moment rather than acknowledged, as you say.
That's what I'm thinking. To smoothly move them to the music, you know. And I think that can happen if the teacher is really excited about what may happen that day in the studio.
Well, it excites me to give people an opportunity to have that break. If I can be part of that healing process or that process of break, I feel like the luckiest woman in the world that I could be that for so many people in my care. And I do feel like that. They are in my care.
Absolutely.
In different ways they're in your care. And so I feel like it's a great privilege to be that. And it changes week to week and day to day and singer to singer, depending on their individual needs, right? You have to be able to read people and make those assessments.
Absolutely.
It's one of my favorite parts of the job. So, well, let's move. Thank you all. I think we've gathered this wonderful thread of questions and comments through this topic. I'd love to move toward motivation for ourselves, and maybe we can delve a little bit into how to keep our students motivated. And Anne-Marie, is this the part of, I don't know this therapy, you mentioned it, I think earlier, maybe the ACT. Is this part of the motivation? Is this a good place to discuss that?
Gosh, there's so much to say about motivation. And so maybe I'll say a couple words about the acceptance and commitment therapy, and then also give people a practical tool for motivation.
Okay, love it.
So acceptance and commitment therapy is a newer therapy, and it's sort of classic cognitive behavioral therapy that I talked about before, meeting mindfulness and some Eastern ideas. And I think one of the really valuable takeaways from acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT as it's called, is that reconnecting with our values can be really powerful when we're going through difficult times, difficult emotions, and kind of lacking that direction or motivation. And there's a distinction that I really appreciate in the difference between values and goals. So the idea is that values are sort of like your north on your compass. It's not something you can ever check off a list or say, I've done it. I've achieved being of service, or I've achieved being a caring mentor, or I've achieved being there for my family. But it's really a guiding principle. And so I think that sometimes that can be really, really powerful for us in getting through these hard times, because instead of letting all our decisions being made by our anxiety, by our fear, or by our anger, we can let our decisions be made by those values. Now, along the way, as we follow that north on our compass, we might have goals, which are sort of like cities on the map as we drive along, right? Where we can say, yeah, I've been there, I've done that. So if you want, I can share kind of a practical tool that people can work through for staying motivated to achieve a goal.
Would love it. Please do.
Sure. Yeah, so the jargon for this tool is called mental contrasting with implementation intentions. But luckily, there's an acronym for it, WOOP, W-O-O-P. So it's a 4-step process represented by those 4 letters. And the first one, the W, is a wish. So this is where you write out the wish or the goal that you want to do. It might be during this next 2 months that I'm stuck at home, I want to write 5 songs, or whatever it might be. I want to write a concept album about COVID. I mean, who knows? I really want to perfect this particular vocal technique, or I want to learn more jazz repertoire, whatever it is. But you really spell out, what is this wish that I have? What is it that I want to achieve? Now, step 2, the first O, stands for outcome. And that's where we really write down, and I would encourage writing these, although you could certainly just talk it through with a colleague, a friend, a teacher, whatever. But the O is for outcome. And this is where we really write out or talk out why we care about this. Like, why would I want to write 5 songs in the next month? What would that do for me? What values does it connect to? How would my life be different if I were able to achieve this thing? why bother? So we really remind ourselves and motivate ourselves instead of relying on a pep talk from someone else. Now, the third part, the O, is obstacles. And this is acknowledging there are very real obstacles. If it were easy, we wouldn't need tools, we wouldn't need support, right? We would just decide on goals and do them and stay motivated. So in O, we anticipate what are the biggest things that could hold me up. And then in P, we write down the plan for addressing those. How are we going to get around these things that could get in the way of our songwriting, our singing practice, whatever it may be? And so I think that can be a great tool to, again, either just sort of journal about or perhaps to talk about with someone else who supports your music.
Wow, thank you. Thank you. That was really wonderful, Anne-Marie. And Duke, you also had some interesting thoughts around mentoring aspect, cognitive behavioral concepts.
And yeah, actually talked a little bit about that mentoring idea in relation to being a piano teacher and then becoming a therapist. And we've talked a lot about the boundaries and the difference in boundaries, et cetera. I really appreciate, Anne-Marie, the ACT therapy and the connection to CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. I've worked a lot with DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, and love the concept of recognition of what type of mind we're using at any point in time, whether we're acting out of emotion mind, if we're focusing on our emotions, or whether we're accessing our reasonable mind. And reasonable mind, sometimes we don't believe we have, but I think in this situation, there's so many connections to reasonable mind. All those things that that somebody was saying earlier about, I think, Kari, you were saying, yes, I do have so many things that I can be grateful for. I am alive today, I can still sing, and on, and make a list of those things. And when you start talking about values, it stirs all of that for me, I think, Anne-Marie, and the mindfulness concept of a wise mind, that's hard to talk about with people, but it's supposedly it is, I believe, the intersection of wise mind and reasonable mind. I say to clients, it's this thing deep down inside of you that you feel more than you can really express when you know that something's just right and a decision is just right. And I think I see a whole lot of overlap, Anne-Marie, in what you were talking about in terms of being able to access this place deep inside of ourselves that says, well, whatever else, I have hope for the future. And if I have hope for the future, then this is what I need to do today. And maybe using some of those ideas could get started some of the concepts you were talking about as well.
And Anne-Marie, I want to make sure that we're getting a question. WOOP, W-O-O-P, is wish, outcome, obstacle, plan.
Correct. Yeah.
Wish, outcome, optical plan, W-O-O-P.
Absolutely. And again, happy to send resources around that and science backing it if people are interested.
So much. And Susan, anything from you specifically? Not to put you on.
No, Duke and Anne-Marie, I agree with all the things you're saying. I like that WOOP idea. I would just add observation, self-observation. Sometimes that's really helpful to me. I guess I'm at a phase in my life where I'm not so interested in judging myself and being harsh with myself, as I've got that in spades. So what I do when I'm trying to work towards something and dragging my heels, I just kind of watch myself and I kind of go, well, how's that working out for you? How's that working? Just keep watching myself without, forcing myself in either direction. And I remind myself that present Susan wants to be kind to future Susan. So whatever I'm doing right now is going to impact what's going to happen to me next. So I do try to keep a hold of the future. And I like what Anne-Marie had to say about that earlier, that cognitive behavioral thing. So.
Well, as we move towards the top of the hour, I think this might bring us nicely home. One of my friends who's a psychotherapist, we were talking about this, and she talked about the identity piece for singers. And her comments were, you know, in a capitalist society, we attach self-concept and identity to the earning of money in relationship to our identity as a performing artist. So if we're not earning, does our singing have any merit and value if we're just singing for the sake of singing? So then it's not about the making money, it's about the doing of the act. And I think, you know, this is a time to really bring that home to our singers. Not just those that are losing income, because to me, I don't differentiate my singers who are actually getting paid to sing and those who are getting ready to do a collegiate recital, right? Those have equal value. But this identity piece for all of the singers, I don't have a performance on my plate. Why bother practicing? Why? And I think that's all tied into the identity piece for us as singers, which is so strongly held within each of us. So any thoughts or observations to help our students with that aspect of self-identity?
Yeah, I'm so glad you bring this up, and it immediately brings to mind some of the work I've done with people who have physical disabilities, maybe a spinal cord injury, losing a limb, anything like that, that really changes a lot of how you're able to do things or what you're able to do compared to the past. And I think sometimes with a new physical disability, there can be a temptation for people to talk about it as, oh, he used to be a musician, you know, but now he can't play guitar. And the reframe is, no, that person is absolutely still a musician, regardless of whether or not they're playing guitar or they're expressing their musicianship in some other way. And so too, in this time, I don't think it matters if someone is not able to perform. It makes them no less a musician, no less a singer. Obviously, it matters a great deal for their survival, whether or not they're getting paid. And I don't want to undermine that at all. But in terms of that identity and everything that they're still bringing to it, that is all absolutely intact and will be able to reemerge when the circumstances change. So I'm so glad that you bring up this piece.
Mm-hmm. Also, just would want to say something about Kohut's idea of narcissistic vulnerability. I think that anybody in the arts has a little bit of narcissistic vulnerability, and narcissism and shame, you know, need to be in balance. So they might be getting their self-worth through getting income, performing, you know, being applauded and so on, to an excessive degree, such that when they're not getting that, they fall all the way into shame. So I think just, you know, keeping in mind that not just your identity, but your value as a human being is not determined by a single thing. Trying to keep yourself from letting your boat sink too much.
Well, and I think as voice teachers, we are going to have to pivot. A powerful pivot, as one of my students said to me yesterday, to find new ways to keep them motivated and keep them realizing how important that they must sing. They must make sound with their body.
Lifeblood.
Even if it doesn't have an outcome of an audience, but that for their own wellness, it's a crucial time for that.
And I think find ways to perform. I was kind of joking with my husband. I was going to do like the Beatles and get on our rooftop with an amplifier and a guitar. I don't know if I will, but you know, get out there, get out on the street and play music. We're allowed to do that. 6 feet of distance.
Alan and his family set up on their a deck yesterday, and all say they gave. How long was your performance? 30 minutes or so live performance?
Probably about 30 minutes. Yeah.
Love it. There you go.
Yeah, live face. So again, that to me takes us back to, we have it so much easier than the Spanish flu, you know, in that we have so many more opportunities to keep this connection. So
it also puts me in mind of values again, because I think that, for instance, for me, a way that I have dealt with my anxieties about this is to refocus on my value of being of service and trying to use my skills or expertise to support my community at this time. And I think musicians are so well positioned to do that and to serve as a source of inspiration and comfort in really powerful and emotionally connecting ways. And so to the extent that people value that or find it helpful to focus on that, I love Susan's idea of just getting creative about how they can still reach out, put their music out there, and have that audience and that connection, because so many people need that from musicians and artists right now.
Thank you for saying that.
I love those ideas, and I'm also thinking about this period of time more than any I can think of that is really going to put the teacher in the place of the cheerleader, you know, and being able to find that somehow. And once again, it brings up the idea of teachers taking care of themselves enough to be able to do this, but to be cheerleaders as they've never been before for their students. Have you thought of calling your friend and just singing this for your friend online? You know, maybe 3 of you could group together and do a little mini master class or a performance class or something. I think, you know, the more creative ideas the teacher can come up with, and the more sort of cheerleading that, yes, you are going to be able to sing for hundreds of people again in the same room. And we all have to keep that hope. Also, the reality, you know, I think probably pianists spend a little more time alone in general than singers do, because it's the nature of being a pianist, I think. But at any rate, I think the teacher's talking about the many, many hours of alone time and empathizing with that everyone spends if one's going to be a serious musician, and that while we're making music alone, there's something that's happening in the universe if we can tune into it.
Oh, that's it. That's an interesting thought, Duke.
I would also want to be a proponent of sorrow and song, and that it need not just be, you know, the joy of music, but just, you know, like thinking of slaves out in the fields. I mean, that's how they got through. They did the call and response kind of singing. And, you know, out of grief can come some beautiful music, the blues. So maybe people want to sing sad songs. They want to go down deep into that, something like that. There is so much to mourn right now, and mourning is healthy. We're still in the shock and fear part, and I think that's appropriate. But as we can, I think just allowing ourselves to mourn and to move into some of those sad spaces is really healthy and healing. It's good for the body.
I expect some wonderful new songs from you, Susan.
I will be there.
Susan is a wonderful singer-songwriter.
Great. What I was going to say, Susan, is you were talking before about stages of grief. And, you know, one of the things we recognize and try and point out to people is how we sort of bounce back and forth between various stages. And so I think we're all in the danger of getting into places where we have some mental success. Oh, wow, I've got that now. And then the next day we're in despair again. And so I think it's important for all of us to recognize that we're going to have a little bit of acceptance one day. And the next day we're going to be as angry as it's possible to be angry. And
Duke, someone has said that your voice is very soothing, in quotes, Mr. Rogers, and that our voices alone as the teachers, being very familiar to our students, have this effect. And we need to remember that.
I would like to say that I appreciate that, and I never had a student who didn't come up with it, nor a client. I've heard that before, but thank you very much.
That's a lovely quality. Well, you know, really throughout history, we know that music has sustained people in the hardest of times and really helped society endure. And as Duke brought up the video from Italy with this people opening their windows and singing, and we're seeing lots more videos about that. And it just always reminds me how we are just on the front line of that for everybody, of emotional health as musicians. So I thank you all for helping us find ways to navigate this so that we can help our students. And we want to remind you there are some resources. Alan, did you want to mention that?
So I just wanted to, remind some people about some general things in your own lives. If you have students or some faculty, if you're at an institution, there are counseling centers at those institutions that are still functioning in many aspects. They may be functioning in a modified capacity, but they are still trying to serve their constituency and their clients within those communities. And so I encourage all of us individually, but also to encourage our students when we sense that there is that need, especially to reach out for those services. And then I know those of us who have health insurance, I know that I got a message from mine reminding me about the free number of sessions that I have on my insurance before certain co-payments and things kick in. And so I encourage everybody to kind of examine your health insurance plan and know what those resources are that are available to you that you may not have ever needed to tap into before. They've always been there. And it's why we have insurance in some respects, and find out about those, because many plans do offer some of those services, and they can be a benefit in these times for all of us.
Thank you,
Alan, thank you. And I would just add to that quickly, having worked with a number of college students, I've noticed that most of them have no idea of what they're usually insured by their parents, and they have no idea what their therapy benefit is, or much at all about their insurance. And so teachers may have to push them to talk with their parents and call the numbers on the back of the insurance card and get that information.
Thank you for that.
I'd add 2 notes about resources. One is just to say that almost every therapist I know is now offering video sessions. And a way to look for a therapist is to go to the Psychology Today directory, search by zip code, by topic, by insurance company, all sorts of things. And the other thing, this is a self-promoting plug, if you'll let me mention this, but I am about to launch a podcast about skills for psychological resilience during coronavirus. So if people are interested in that, I'd be happy to send along information when that's up.
Thank you so much for that. Well, I think the one takeaway today for sure, many takeaways, but one big one is we have to stay connected. We have to stay connected with, and so stay connected with your students, whether it be sending video messages to them along with assignments, or quarantinis like I had with my girlfriends last night on Zoom. So, and as fellow teachers, let's us stay connected so that we can continue to serve our students. I think that's important, and NATS is certainly filled with remarkable members. And so lots of resources for us to support each other through this as teachers. And once again, I have to thank Alan Henderson, the executive director, who has been leading the way. And Alan, I'm hearing from so many other professions how they're marveling at our organization and leading the way in so many aspects through this COVID-19. And I really credit you with that leadership. So thank you.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate it. And it really is a real testament to our community, I think, that we constantly express concern for one another and one another's situations and empathy for what each other is going through, no matter, you know, we've been this way before this crisis, I feel, and certainly this particular situation, like many other situations of this magnitude, bring out the best in people in many ways, and that the outpouring of people wanting to serve, I think, has been really important. And so as an organization, of course, you know, we continue to try to find ways to serve our constituency, our extended constituency, through our students and the greater music community. And so I encourage folks to reach out to me or to Kari with your thoughts and your ideas about how we can continue to serve our community, whether it's through this NATS chats or through other means.
Yes, and we will have more special edition NATS chats. I know you probably are sick of Alan and I, but we want to continue to serve the variety of needs of our community. So we have a collaboration pianist chat where we want to support our collaborative pianists who are really being hit hard in the academic institutions and in independent studios. So that's forthcoming, and one for our students. So we've got more ideas rolling, and as long as Alan and I stay standing, we'll keep finding a way to roll those out. Panelists, this has renewed my spirit. I need this today. So
thank you so much.
Time.
Thank you.
Yeah. Have a wonderful rest of your Sunday, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.